Ashita Sheetsock, how are you all today? Today, to open in a good way, we thought that we would start with this quote from Sitting Bull. It says, "Let us put our minds together and see what life we can make for our children." I think that the traditional concepts of Native American tribes fall on community a lot, and so this was very appropriate. In essence, this mindset is the foundation of what a multidisciplinary team should be. So going forward through this training presentation and in building your own teams, we'd like for you to keep this quote in mind and kind of go back to it to remember that our focus should always be on the youth that we serve. So thank you again for joining us, and we'll go to the introductions.
Hi, thank you, Tasha. My name is Natalie Stipe, and I am Lakota and Dakota. I'm enrolled with the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe, and I've worked for a number of tribes here in the Great Plains region in the Midwest. I'm a technical assistance coordinator with our center. I have a degree from the UCLA School of Law with a specialization in public interest law and policy, and I've been working with tribal governments for almost a decade now. My colleague, my co-presenter here, Tasha, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. My name is Tasha Friday. I am Wichita, Kiowa, and Caddo, enrolled with the Wichita and affiliated tribes in Oklahoma. I am a recent law school graduate from Oklahoma City University, where I received my JD and a certificate in American Indian law. Before law school and working for the center, I worked within tribal human resources, and I hold a master's degree in human resource training. Thank you.
Our objectives today are to provide policy, practice, and resources to tribes that are using multidisciplinary team formats to address juvenile justice issues and tribal youth needs. And overall, the team structure is considered a best practice for delivering the services that our tribal youth need in tribal communities.
To identify ways for tribal youth in healing to wellness programs to cooperate, coordinate, and collaborate while using varied multidisciplinary team formats for advising, planning, case management, providing services and referrals, and creating policies. I like to refer to this as the 3 C's: cooperate, coordinate, and collaborate. You can see that it is a cyclical process by the picture to the right, and so it's something that should be ongoing. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So I guess the initial question is why should we collaborate? And so youth and families often cross over child welfare, juvenile justice, and criminal justice systems. So it just makes sense that they be able to collaborate and provide a comprehensive approach to helping juveniles. Next, it improves outcomes for the youth, for instance, lowering recidivism and promoting recovery. Also, it lowers costs to society. With collaboration, you distribute the financial burden across multiple systems, so that results in an efficient use of resources.
And the systems, like Tasha said, have traditionally operated independent from one another, and we're thinking of child welfare system, we're thinking of the juvenile justice system, we're thinking of the criminal justice system, and these are all operating independently at a high cost to the public, and also, most importantly, to the families, who often are in these various systems or are considered multi-systems, and still are not getting the resources they need to succeed. Professional licensure, certifications, and education are also all different from one another throughout the different systems that serve. I also would like to mention healthcare services in that system as well. Working with families at the center of your team, at the center of your collaboration, is a challenging and complex system change, but it does improve outcomes, and it must be done in order to do so. So those are just a couple of reasons why we think that team collaboration is the foundation for serving our tribal youth adequately, who are being served in the child welfare system, who are being served in our schools, in the juvenile justice system, as well as the healthcare system. So the question that we want to pose, and this may be considered rhetorical, but it's one that we'd like for you to keep in mind throughout the webinar and throughout your work. Like my colleague referred to Sitting Bull's advice. And so why do we work together? We work together for the youth and the children. And what are some other reasons to collaborate that we have mentioned or we may not have mentioned? Please feel free to answer the question in the chat box or bring up other related issues as we go through this. I see that Aaron Sinelk is typing. Some other reasons it would be sustainability. Yes. Thank you, Mashke. Aaron. Sustainability is working together helps to sustain efforts that otherwise might disappear after grant ends or funding, robust funding resources are no longer available. Collaboration is a very cost-effective way of working together beyond financial resources. Thank you, Erin.
And I think to add to that with the sustainability piece is that when you're working in those teams, you can plan ahead for those things that are going to come up so the work does continue. It looks like Anna said, increase capacity and identify community resources. And Aaron, not duplicating services and remaining in silos. And silos are something that we will speak to towards the end of the presentation as well. It looks like Ann said creative brainstorming and problem solving. I think that the brainstorming piece is great because you get a bunch of different perspectives and it helps you to be more, I'm sorry, I lost my word, more creative in your approaches to the obstacles that you'll face.
Missy Fraser brings up a great point in the chat is we may not have the whole picture of what's going on with the family. A really important reason to work together is that all these different systems only see a certain specific view of the family, and we need to holistically approach the family. That's a great point. Thank you, Misty. Tasha, were we able to get to everybody's questions or comments in the chat box? Oh, I see Erin. Erin is saying collaborating with youth for youth. That is an important part of collaboration overall and something that is definitely overlooked at times. It's very challenging to work with youth in decision-making and authority positions, but certainly it is a best practice and it helps to better serve the tribal youth in your community.
It looks like April said ability to wrap around services in a comprehensive, organized manner. And I think that the organization piece, besides the comprehensive piece that we kind of touched on a little bit earlier, keeping things organized so that you aren't duplicating services or that you're approaching the situation in the best way possible so that it can be the most effective to help youth.
And lastly, I would like to note our colleague, Anna, adding to increase capacity and identify community resources. No one individual working for any program or system knows every resource that is out there, but the more minds that come together, the more resources that can be identified in the community, and that builds capacity for all the different programs and organizations and systems at the table. Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you I see Stan Nix is typing. We want to get to his question when it does appear in the box. I will move to the next slide. And Anne is also joining us, so we will wait a few moments for some more comments in the chat box, Tasha.
I really like that one, inspiration. I think that's great because sometimes, especially working in these difficult fields that we work in, it can really bring us down sometimes looking at the problems that exist. And so to be able to inspire each other and uplift each other through those teams and not feel alone, I think that's very important.
Absolutely. What a great point. Thank you so much, Anne. I had a school principal when I was working on a tribal collaborative and was coordinating one. And a school principal would come very regularly, and that was like really a treat because usually you don't get your school principals. They're just too busy. And she would come, and she finally said, I always make it to your meetings, which were monthly, because they inspire me in a way none of my other meetings do. And, I think that goes for all of us across the board. Thank you, Anne. I see Mr. Stan Nix has provided a comment, and he says that sometimes the programs have different goals for the youth and ensure they are prioritized in partnership with youth and not compete with one another. Certainly, it's about that collaboration, not the competition for the different youth and the priorities for the youth. And also, I think program information sharing. What is the goal of juvenile justice that is different than the goal of the mental health care delivery system at the table? How do our educators approach our children differently than, say, the child welfare system? And what do those different goals mean for the youth and the resources that we're able to provide to those who are vulnerable and who we are serving, particularly through our MDT format? Thank you very much for all of your comments. Thank you. Those were great.
Okay, so we'll move to the next slide. And so, based on the chat box comments alone, I know that we're dealing with people with all different levels of life experience and understanding of a multidisciplinary team. But a multidisciplinary team can have a variety of definitions based on your community and what the needs are. But just generally, it's a collaborative team composed of differing system representatives from multiple disciplines in a particular jurisdiction or region. And often it encompasses state, federal, tribal, community, and family representatives, including juvenile justice, health, education, and child welfare systems. So when you are thinking about a multidisciplinary team, it really can be as big or small as your community needs, and it needs to be unique to that community as far as who is included. Next, we'll address the goals of MDTs and collaborative teams. And so depending on the type of MDT, there may be different focuses, goals, or objectives. So for court-based programs, for instance, wellness or drug and mental health courts, they're generally structured in a multidisciplinary format to support effective service provisions for tribal youth. With youth diversion program MDTs, they may collaborate to identify resources to support training and best practices to support program services. And then finally, youth crisis or victim services, those serve more immediate needs and interventions for tribal youth. We can go to the next slide. Again, we're back to, like I said, what I like to call the 3 C's, just a continuation of what a multidisciplinary team is. It's going to coordinate criminal justice, health, mental health, substance abuse treatment, and other services for victims and clients. And it collaborates to create a forum for system of change and quality improvement, cooperates with collective case management and incorporating a variety of services to clients or victims. And then it communicates information sharing and accountability for all involved.
There are a variety of considerations for your team membership. Certainly one of them is the community standing and the background of each team member. As much as possible, you want to make sure that not only can they pass a formal background check, that's required by federal law when you work with youth and children, but also their community standing in terms of their reputation. Also, we know that sometimes the criminal justice system is hit or miss in terms of who might not be of good character. And so consider that when you're asking team members to join. What is their reputation in their community? Another important part of the team is the service providers and considering their professional licensure. This goes to attorneys, physicians, nurses, mental health practitioners, and also teachers who also are licensed professionals. All of those things should be considered as you look at your team membership. Another aspect is considering culture and spirituality, and that is involving elders or your spiritual leaders and your culture bearers. Often is the term that people are culture keepers. Affording them the opportunity to participate in the MDTs is important. And I say affording the opportunity because it does take some effort at whoever the coordinator is at that level to ensure that your spiritual and cultural leaders are able to participate. This may mean holding, like when you do reaching out to parents, you might have to have your meetings in the evening times, which often is not cooperative with the service providers, the licensed folks who often are 9 to 5. Also, considering the culture and spirituality in terms of how do you compose your team membership to begin with. Is it appropriate if you are male or female in that tribal community to approach, say, a young woman and ask her to join your team as a youth representative? What is the appropriate way to do those types of things in the tribal community that you're working with? Those are all considerations along the culture and spirituality. And certainly something that should be considered is the kinship, especially if you're a tribal member working for your own youth in your own community. The kinship, your relatives, can be both a challenge as well as definitely an opportunity. I know that sometimes teams have stalled out at the tribal program level. And one of the things that comes back to me repeatedly through grantees and my work with tribes is that, I'm going to go ask this person to join because they're my cousin and I know that they'll come. And those kinship ties can reinvigorate a team to start looking at tribal youth issues again, or to start up. And then also, lastly, the legal and political considerations, the jurisdiction you're in. If there's any existing cooperative relationships, particularly those that are formally set out in MOUs, and also the community dynamics. Is the community in a crisis right now? Is it the best time to try to do a team building? Are there political interests that need to be considered? Has there been a recent tragedy? These are all dynamics that you need to consider as you not only consider your team membership, but begin to convene your team. One of the biggest selling points, I think, for involvement is being able to say, I have so-and-so involved, would you like to join? I have your uncle, I have your grandmother involved, I have your attorney general or, this well-known advocate. That also can help to invigorate and start up your team and should be considered. Some examples of these multidisciplinary team approaches. U.S. attorneys do this in Indian country. They're for prosecutorial purposes mostly. Oftentimes they'll include juveniles and adults in these discussions at the tribal or reservation level, and will also be allied with victim services coordination as well. And to emphasize, this is a prosecutorial type of effort, so it is has some different dynamics, say, than the other one that we know is the Healing to Wellness teams. And those are what some of your programs are doing, and that is convening a multidisciplinary team specifically to address substance abuse disorders and bringing together all these different resources in a collaborative way. And the focus is the youth in need. The focus is the respondent. And unfortunately, sometimes these individuals also known as a defendant. But keeping in mind that our tribal youth are the focus, and also adults who are in need and who have substance abuse issues that they need to address in our communities. And that's a little bit different focus than, say, a federal prosecutorial NDT. So just to point out these differences, different examples might be the community advisory committees that our grantees have been convening for some time in this grant program. The sexual assault response teams, often coordinated by your IHS or your healthcare provider in the tribal community. That's also collaborative and is multidisciplinary. Also, it does have a focus on victim services as well as investigation and prosecutorial functions. But its emphasis on the victim is also noteworthy for the start. It places the victim at the center, much like any type of the teams that we're advocating place the tribal youth at the center. The child protection teams and the authority and the strength of a child protection team differs according to your jurisdiction and how it may be set up. Sometimes the education or the school folks lead that. Sometimes your social services might lead that. But this is also an example of a collaborative team. So those are just a few that you might be familiar with doing the work that you do on the reservations. Moving on to the next slide. The considerations at the start, and we've gone over those a little bit already, is looking at your community, assessing its resources, its strengths, its needs, and looking at your existing collaborative teams in your community. Do you have an MDT for the U.S. Attorney's Office? Is there a SART that maybe an IHS nurse is heading up? Do you have a functioning community advisory committee for your tribal youth programs, or have you had one in the past? Looking at all these different ways of collaborating is important. Many new collaboratives have arisen at the tribal community level around suicide prevention. That might be another one to consider as you're starting up your MDT or reinvigorating your collaborative team. And then, of course, the more technical aspects of it and looking at tribal resolutions, MOUs, maybe even looking at some of the reciprocity and jurisdictional issues, whether or not your team would need statutory authority or is indeed authorized by tribal statute. All of those things should be considered when you're starting to form your multidisciplinary team. This is a lot to unpack, this particular slide. And looking at considering your local authority, law, and policy, looking at the codification of the MDT or the other team efforts, which are referred to in the previous slide. You know, when you codify and you look at code development issues, they can often be very tedious and they're very lengthy. They certainly can be lengthier than any grant program project period that I've heard of. There's other formal and informal methods to convene and get your team together that are usually available. And also for authorizing collaborative teams that may have actual legal authority or at least advisory capacity to a court. You know, look at your rules for civil procedure, look at your rules for criminal procedure if applicable. Those all might be different ways in which to authorize and formalize your team. Usually cooperative agreements and partnerships can be formalized through an MOU or an MOA without any codification and with the proper statutory and procedural authority. Consider keeping a team advisory if you have identified any barriers or if you have certain individuals that might be raising challenges to, say, taking a collaborative approach or gathering your team. Because if you have an advisory group, you know, that certainly can help to have a functioning group and then address whatever you need to address systematically in a piecemeal fashion. So overall, just looking at what is in play in your local jurisdiction, and then certainly institutionalizing that. If you do want to look at putting into code, policy, or procedure, that does count towards systems change and sustainability goals, which oftentimes our grantee programs have for tribal youth programs. Okay, next slide. Looking at the potential obstacles, looking at funding and the other resources, team engagement, family engagement. These are two that arise repeatedly, and that's why I note that you're probably not just starting up a team, you might be reinvigorating an existing team, and there also might be multiple teams. in your community. There's also the institutional and professional barriers can be obstacles at times, addressing confidentiality and privileges like attorney-client or physicians. Those can also present barriers. We have resources to address all these obstacles and barriers, I want to note. The differences in the terminology and the philosophical approach, which can go to silos, the different professional goals, the different roles of the attorney versus the healer versus the counselor, and versus the youth, of course. And then also considering that the youth is having all these different approaches coming at them as well. And then some of the more casual things that I'd like to call silos or turf roles or grudges. You know, maybe programs collaborated a decade or two ago and they still have that grudge. And that program may have inherited it, even if all the individuals who were involved in the previous conflict are now no longer working in the same role. So all these things can be obstacles when you're putting together your team. They are normal obstacles, they are common obstacles, and they are certainly obstacles that technical assistance can help you overcome in building your team.
So in thinking about the obstacles that Natalie mentioned, we would love to hear what obstacles your community faced regarding collaborative teams, or what obstacles that you can kind of forecast that may inhibit, you know, your forward movement. If you would like, just type it in the chat box. Okay, it looks like Misty and Daniel are typing. We have a hard time getting all of the team players there, specifically law enforcement. I guess, Misty, if I could ask a follow-up question, is there a particular reason? Does it have to do with law enforcement hours or just a buy-in issue? What do you think is the driver behind having difficulty bringing them to the table?
We have multiple attendees typing into the chat box, so we just want to take a moment and make sure that everyone can get their comments or question presented. And I was just going to pull us back to this obstacle slide before the discussion, and just note that these are obstacles that are common, and then there's also very specific ones for each community, each program. And certainly in this presentation, with the way we designed it was to provide you with some basic information that we have identified as TA providers, and then for purposes of discussion. So thank you very much for participating. Appreciate that. Tasha, Misty responded to your comment.
Yeah, I see that. It says that work hours is a part of it because the meetings are during the day and most of them work in the evening and weekends. And like Natalie said, well, this is just a broad overview for that particular problem. Maybe something to do is to see if the force has the capacity to allow them the time off to do that, to come to the meetings, or if they designate a specific representative that comes every time that will have the ability to make the meetings. Oftentimes, I think we have to kind of go to the top to see if they can support our efforts a little more. But, there are so many different obstacles for different communities that just kind of will have to be creative and see what works.
Yeah, that's a great response, Tasha, and I would agree that the collaboration is very difficult because of working hours. It's a very practical scheduling type of issues that can be a definite obstacle. And in that sense, then, special meetings, perhaps quarterly, that don't coincide with regular business hours, in order to do specific law enforcement reaching out or outreach, that needs to be considered at the local level. So I just wanted to add on to Tasha and Misty's conversation. We have a comment from Danielle Hina, who says, our judge does not think cultural activity will work in the rehabilitation process. However, the rest of the team believes the cultural activity will work. I cannot wait to show our judge the data that we have collected to prove that our approach will work. And thank you, Daniel. That's a wonderful comment. Buy-in around, the importance of culture in all of this. This is something we deal with at the mainstream level, and this is something we deal with in our own communities, in our own tribal communities, and maybe among those professionals who might come to serve us and the tribal youth. You certainly, Daniel, and for the rest of the participants as well, we have a lot of literature that demonstrates the connection between cultural practices and program delivery being a best practice, a promising practice, and for Native American tribal youth populations. And so, Daniel, we actually have some really great articles. A journal was recently published by a colleague of ours, Dr. Jamie Farkas, and we can provide that to you as well. If you would like some additional data for your judge, we'll be happy to help you with that. And another comment by Anna Rangel is that it can be really hard to get everyone to join in. I think providing regular updates of the team work to invited partners, even when they are not able to join, is helpful. Good point. That's keeping that communication open, and even when they're not able to join, keeping them in the loop. That can be helpful towards keeping that collaborative team cohesive and moving forward. Missy also added another comment. Part of it is the buy-in also. The officers see the benefit, but the buy-in is not there with the chief of police. Tasha, did you want to speak to that a little bit more before we get to the next comment?
I really think that, we kind of already wrapped our minds around that, as far as taking it to the top. And it always depends on what the structure of each tribal community is and how their government is structured. I think in some instances we just have to keep pushing to the top until we find someone that is willing to buy in, and then hope that it will trickle down, or that there can be a directive where, these teams become a priority.
Thank you, Tasha. We have a comment from Ann Niblett, and she says, sometimes there's resistance when you work for a tribe that you aren't a member of for both Native and non-Native employees. Absolutely, absolutely. Building a team is difficult, especially when, you might be considered an outsider. That's certainly a position that requires some additional resources, I think, to help you to build the team that you need in order to serve your tribal youth. Misty said, that's a good idea, thank you. Stan Nix said, I was striving to include ex-cons into our gang prevention and was prevented due to background checks. They made the mistakes and served their sentence and lived through change and had valuable insight and change talk to share, but were not welcomed. Mr. Nix brings up a really important point about the complexities of serving our youth and also acknowledging the experiences within our communities. We have many survivors of incarceration, and that is something that can present a challenge when getting together your team. Maybe my colleague Anna might want to speak to this a little bit more, or Tasha, feel free to chime in. I just want to get to the three other comments. Also, Eulalia Lucero said that she's getting referrals from providers that service the youth. That is one of the biggest difficulties for functioning MDT. Absolutely. And MOU sometimes can help provide that, and building relationships with those people who would give you referrals is also an important part of that. One thing that I found helped in the past on a personal experience, work experience level, was creating a form and passing it out to everyone I possibly could that simply said referral form. And then we started to get those referral forms just simply from creating that form. Nothing else other than we have some services, and if the people you see also need those services, fill out this form and get them to us. That was one way we took a look at that. Yes, and Daniel, we will definitely get the academic journal research to you. And Tuli Yasmin Ironclad Two Dogs brings up something that has come up repeatedly, STP, The same 10 people are on every community committee, team, and they suffer burnout. So how do you support those team members who are so active, who are often suffering from compassion fatigue, burnout, and even at times vicarious trauma? Maybe some of my colleagues can speak to and comment on that as well. I think that is a very serious issue for MDTs and other collaborative teams.
Hi, this is Anna. Can you hear me?
Yes, Anna, please.
Hi, I just wanted to comment on Stan's comment from earlier that we understand that the MDT structure is going to vary, and some of the MDTs are going to be direct service providers, and others might be community-based MDTs that are really looking toward broader, maybe community policy change, or just able to invite members that don't necessarily have to pass background checks. So I think that's the difference there if you're looking at direct service provision to youth versus, a community-based organization that's coming together for broader change. Where it's direct service provision and someone, maybe is not able to serve on the team directly, I think still having that insight is important. And so, even inviting them to speak to the team. These are community members, they're in the community, so I think there has to be some kind of exception where, they can be integrated within the team in some way, but to not push them out and not have that insight. So I definitely see that as valuable, and, in the future, maybe that's a way that you could get around that barrier.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Anna. Thank you for those comments. I think just to underscore that is that sometimes in terms of background checks, and particularly in terms of youth, sometimes you just, like maybe if you do say invite them to speak, the barrier is that you need to supervise them if youth are present. That ends up being a practice that has been employed at least with 2 of the juvenile detention centers that I have worked with. So there are ways to address these barriers for sure, and especially when you need that life experience and knowledge to share with the tribal youth. So thank you very much. Okay, some tools, and we've already gone over them, so I don't want to just read from my slide, but when you get your team together, or the seeds to your team, sit down and collectively identify those obstacles, maybe ones that you are experiencing in real time, ones that you can anticipate, or ones that have been dealt with in the past, and then look at strategies to overcome those obstacles as a collaborative team. Engage with your families and your youth directly for that broad input on the planning and the programming, especially for case management practices, which, is hopefully the end result. One of the end results of the MDT or collaborative team approach. Another approach is to build that knowledge base and the skill set. Like Mr. Daniel Hina commented, they are bringing the data to their judge to help to persuade him. They are building her or his knowledge base regarding the importance of cultural and rehabilitation and addressing these addiction issues plaguing our tribal youth. Another tool is to create those partnerships through regular meetings and communication. And then also creating a forum, perhaps outside of that team structure, but create that forum for identifying the community-based solutions to these overlapping issues of addiction, of mental health, often of child abuse and neglect, as well as juvenile delinquency and juvenile justice. So some tools, again, our center is able to provide these very specific tools to you as you identify the obstacles and the strategies that you need to overcome in order to have a functioning and operative collaborative team for your TYP or for your Healing to Wellness court. On the next slide.
When we're looking at who should be included on our team, we provided this graphic, but of course, like we said before, it's not all inclusive. should be uniquely tailored to your community and the needs that are specific to that area. One thing that we did want to stress is keeping youth in the center and being reminded that we're all surrounding them in an effort to make their life better, to help them get through this difficult time, and to provide all of these services to them. And I think it goes back to how we opened in a good way in that quote. And like I said, if we can be mindful of those things and keep it centered on the youth, and specifically if we have a team on a personal level, so this isn't just youth 4670, this is Joe, whoever, and we know them by name and we know their story and we're invested in them. We may not interact with them all at the same time, but we know that we are focused on this particular child. And then we'll go to the next slide. So why should we use MDTs and team approaches in juvenile justice? Like we've said before, it impacts every facet of the youthful offender's life. The detention is going to disrupt their education, family cohesion, and the provision of services. And it also exacerbates pre-existing behavioral and mental health problems. And we all know that the needs overlap different disciplines, but, when we look at statistics, it kind of makes it very apparent and magnifies it. Approximately 70% of justice-involved youth met criteria for at least one mental disorder. So we cannot afford to separate those two issues. They're very interconnected. And then among adolescents detained for criminal offending in the year 2006, 56% of boys and 40% of girls tested positive for drugs. So again, these things are so interconnected that it just makes sense that we approach these in a comprehensive team manner.
And I would just add to that, Tasha, that this is Natalie again, is that a lot of the tribal youth, and I saw something upwards of almost a third of the tribal youth entering into juvenile detention centers, at least in the federal system in a study I read. Most of them have experienced the death of a caregiver. They are more actively mourning and grieving the loss of family members like grandparents and parents. And other caregivers in their lives. So that grief is significant, and that healing is important to address what our tribal youth are enduring, and what our programs are set up to address. So I just wanted to add that as a statistic. Maybe I should add that into these. Thank you. I just wanted to add that. Okay. Looking at our next slide is looking at the benefits. I mean, we've gone over the benefits throughout this webinar. It allows for coordination of all these different services. The collaboration can allow for some age-appropriate, culturally responsive treatments to be developed by the group. It helps, of course, to support, facilitate collective case management for a wraparound approach to the services you're providing to tribal youth. Also, you get to know what's going on with the families. You can actively monitor their progress and identify opportunities for early intervention. One thing we've noticed is the data shows us is often children who are first in your child welfare system experiencing abuse and neglect, then they're in the juvenile justice system, and then finally they're in the adult criminal justice system. And so what this team approach can do is help to identify those tribal youth who might need additional intensive resources for an early intervention into their lives. And it helps overall to create accountability for everyone who's involved. If you're at the table and you're on the team, if you're communicating with the team and people are actually collaborating, that creates automatic accountability instead of sort of this faceless or nameless type of systems behavior that all of us can fall into if we're working within the system. So that the accountability mechanism is really a benefit to this team approach. Excuse me.
this next slide is primarily more of an easy reference guide, something you can pull from the PowerPoint and use for brainstorming, like someone else mentioned. These different roles are going to be filled depending on your community. So this is just primarily for your reference. It does look like we had a couple of chats come in, so I wanted to read those really quick. Looks like Enothleen said, shared responsibility for the well-being of our children, families, and community. And Ms. Lucero said, thank you for mentioning the unresolved issues that our youth deal with on grief. And so in that instance, maybe grief counselors or traditional ceremonies to address grief, those kinds of things can be incorporated in your team if that's an issue that your community is facing. We do want to note that, in this context, the multidisciplinary team should ideally be trauma-informed. And so, we want to look at all the traumas that the youth experience and see how we can address those comprehensively.
Other possible team members that we didn't list, of course, are youth representatives themselves, and often involving youth, I know even for our own center, is to include the 18 to 25 age group. Of course, they're in the age of majority, and so you don't have some of the schooling type of issues and challenges. Also going to your organized youth councils in your tribal community is another possible team member or avenue for true membership that I just wanted to highlight. So, thank you for that. Tasha, did you want to say anything more on this particular slide?
No. We can go to the next slide.
Thank you. So we just have listed some resources for collaborative teams. And of course, we have resources that we have mentioned regarding some of these obstacles and challenges for your collaborative teams for the tribal youth. We also have a new website, which is listed here as well. We have our juvenile drug treatment court guidelines that came out from OJJDP, and the National Council of Judges for Family Law Courts, NCJFCJ, provides the technical assistance for those guidelines, and there's a series of seminars available to them. They can be very helpful to our tribal juvenile healing to wellness court program. Of course, the planning guide, as well as the tribal 10 key components. And I would mention, I think it came up in discussion earlier around culture, and certainly the practices, the evidence that we have is for a couple decades now of tribal adult healing to wellness is that culture is absolutely critical to rehabilitation and recovery. Sasha, did you want to go over the rest of the resources, please?
Yeah, so for resource number 5, if you go to collaborativejustice.org and you follow the link, there's actually a curriculum that helps kind of walk you through the steps of building an MDT. And, we're not promoting that everything is cookie cutter, but it can definitely give you a jumping off point or reference guides if you find yourself, somewhere where you don't know what the next direction is. And then number 6, there is actually an online survey with real-time results that you can give to your team members, kind of as a pulse check, and it assesses the team and where the team members stand and how they think things are going, because sometimes, especially if you're leading the team, you think everything is great, but there may be things that need to be addressed. So, for instance, the burnout that Enothleen mentioned, or things like that. And so that's a really great resource. I took it myself, and so it's real time. And then finally, the Future of Children, Juvenile Justice, Volume 18, Number 2, and that provides other information as far as creating MDTs for juveniles.
And I just want to add as resources for any collaborative teams is that SAMHSA has a lot of information on collaborative teams. It's one of their key principles of trauma-informed principles of collaboration and mutuality. So that MDD format is trauma-informed, and also if you all are trying to implement trauma-informed care and approaches, MDT is, and that collaboration is a part of it. So I just wanted to bring that up, and that, of course, any of the federal agency websites like SAMHSA, OJDDP have resources for trauma-informed approaches in care, and of course our center does as well. So I just wanted to mention that as an additional resources. And
I really like how interactive this group has been as far as, using the chat box. Even right now, we see that you're supporting your peers and giving each other ideas, and that's ultimately what we want from this experience, is that you are learning, and we know that that's not just from the information that we give you, but that we can learn from each other. So now we'll open it up to questions, comments, or feedback that you'd like to give, and that way we can move forward with our conversation.
As I see people are typing into the chat box, Tasha, I don't want to be repetitive, but I just wanted to mention that Tumi Aslane commented that we need to include the youth as possible team members, and absolutely that is true, and that takes some consideration of challenges like the timing of your meetings, maybe gas cards and transportation, whether or not you want to include people under the age of 18. You can learn more about trauma-informed care on the ICCTC website, which is where we are housed at the University of Oklahoma, and that is the www.icctc.org. Anne and Stan were having a conversation, and she suggested that there might be another venue to include ex-cons and ex-gang members. That trust has to be earned, and that might take some time. Anne said, thank you, Anne. And then also possibly interviewing them through video and utilizing their wisdom and experience that way in order to reduce contact. And we just want to say that's a great idea, and thank you very much for that conversation. And I see that my colleague Anna Miguel is also typing. Excuse me. But I just wanted to go through that chat before we concluded here. Are there any other comments or questions or feedback? I just want to note, I do want to get out the information and study research journal that we have regarding culture, related to culture and rehabilitation efforts. And then if there's any other ideas that have occurred to you here as participants, please feel free to follow up with any of us. Our contact information, the presenter and I, Tasha's, is in your box. And we really enjoy hearing feedback also. Yeah, I think we should, Tasha, if you want to we have some new resources we'd like to tell you about too before we conclude.
We do have a resource guide on multidisciplinary teams and team approaches that's forthcoming, and so we will make that available on our website, and we'll send out an email letting you know when that's available for a download.
Thank you, Tasha. And one comment is how serious of an offense to be allowed into the JHTWC program. I think that should be a conversation, Daniel, between yourself and your TA coordinator or any of us, perhaps offline. And that's certainly determined by the individual tribal community as well as the general practices and standards that are set forth for drug courts. So let's have that conversation and follow up with that. Thank you, Daniel. And Anna offered to discuss that as well. Thank you for your comment. Okay, well, we are coming up on the top of the hour with a few minutes to spare. I would like to thank you for your presence and for your spirit, for your good works. We look forward to a long and harmonious relationship with each of you in providing resources to serve our tribal youth. Please call us and reach out to us if you have any questions. We have coordinators assigned to each and every tribe. We also provide technical assistance to all of Indian country at individual request. In one of your boxes here, you have a survey available to you. We'd love to hear back some evaluation or some comments on how this webinar went for you. So we'd love to hear back if you could do that before signing off with the few minutes that we have to spare. And again, thank you for your time today, and thank you for all the work that you do.